Scotland's dream of empire collapsed when 2,000 colonists died in the Darien swamps, wiping out a quarter of the nation's wealth. Then, after Culloden, tens of thousands were driven from their homes. Those refugees weren't just looking for survival. They founded Canada's identity, built its first government, and left their language across a continent. How did a nation's ruin become another's beginning? The answer lies in a sequence of disasters that would force a country to remake itself across an ocean. In July 1998, 5 ships slipped out of Leith, carrying the hopes of a nation and the lives of 1,200 men, women, and children. Their destination: the sweltering, uncharted jungles of Panama's Darien Gap. The plan was bold: build a Scottish colony called New Caledonia and control the trade between oceans. But the jungle had other plans. Mosquitoes brought fever and disease. The food rotted. Rain fell without end. Within months, tropical sickness swept through the camp, claiming hundreds. The Spanish closed in, blockading the coast and cutting off any escape by sea. Desperate, the settlers begged for help from nearby English colonies, but King William III had issued strict orders: no aid for the Scots. Fearing a diplomatic crisis with Spain, English ports turned them away. The settlers were left to starve and die, their pleas echoing across the Atlantic, unanswered. By the time the first attempt was abandoned in July 1999, fewer than 300 of the original colonists remained alive. A second wave arrived, only to find graves and jungle reclaiming the settlement. By 1700, fewer than 1 in 10 survived. Over 2,000 lives were lost in less than 2 years. The cost reached far beyond the graves. Scotland lost a quarter of its entire capital. Bank accounts, family fortunes, even church funds vanished into the jungle. The nation stood bankrupt and broken. As the last survivors surrendered to the Spanish in a driving rain, a lone piper played a lament, the sound swallowed by the jungle. The dream of a Scottish empire ended not with glory, but with ruin and silence. The wreckage left behind would force Scotland into a union it never truly wanted. April 16th, 1746. The fields near Culloden filled with gunpowder smoke and the thunder of musket fire. In less than an hour, over 1,000 Highlanders fell. The government's losses barely reached 50. The Jacobite cause, and with it the old Highland way of life, was crushed before the sun reached its peak. Survivors faced more than defeat. The government moved swiftly to erase the very fabric of Highland identity. Parliament passed the Dress Act, making it illegal to wear tartan or kilts. Bagpipes, once the heart of every gathering, were silenced by law. Speaking Gaelic, the language of the glens, became an act of quiet rebellion. Chiefs lost their power. Clans lost their land. The old order was dismantled piece by piece, but the final blow came not with swords or muskets, but with eviction notices. Landlords, many living far from the Highlands, saw more profit in sheep than in people. Starting in the mid-1700s, families who had survived Culloden now found themselves forced from their homes. Cottages burned, livestock driven away. Some were offered assisted passages, a one-way ticket out, paid for by the very landlords who pushed them off the land. Between 1750 and 1860, as many as 150,000 Highlanders were uprooted. Most did not leave by choice. They were loaded onto ships with little more than what they could carry, bound for unknown shores. The Highlands emptied, not by war, but by design. For those left behind, the hills grew silent. For those sent away, the only option was to start again, far from the land of their ancestors. The Hector's voyage began with hope, but the Atlantic soon turned hostile. For 11 weeks, 189 Highlanders endured cramped decks, spoiled food, and the slow spread of smallpox and dysentery. 18 never saw land again. Each morning, families counted their losses, wrapping the dead in canvas before the sea claimed them. By the time the Hector reached Pictou Harbour on September 15, 1773, the survivors were hollow-eyed and weak, expecting the new life they'd been promised. Instead, they found empty shorelines, no shelter, and winter closing in fast. Michael Moore MacDonald, remembered as the first to step ashore, found nothing but forest and cold wind. With no provisions and little knowledge of the land, desperation set in. Then the Mi'kmaq people appeared. They brought fish, showed how to build shelters from birch and spruce, and shared the skills needed to survive the coming freeze. That first winter, the kindness of the Mi'kmaq turned near certain tragedy into a fragile beginning. The Scots endured, clinging to life and memory under overturned boats, as a new chapter quietly took root on the edge of the unknown. Between 1815 and 1870, the tide of Scottish migration swelled. More than 50,000 Highlanders crossed the Atlantic, driven by eviction and the promise of land. They brought their language, their songs, and the memory of a homeland lost. In the forests and valleys of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, these newcomers did not simply survive, they rebuilt what had been taken from them. Gaelic became the voice of daily life. By 1850, census records counted nearly 200,000 Gaelic speakers in Canada, making it the third most common European language after English and French. In some settlements, especially on Cape Breton Island, only Gaelic was spoken. Children learned clan stories by the peat fire. Ceilidhs filled the night with music and laughter. The clan system, dismantled by force in Scotland, found new ground among the spruce and granite. Here, the old ways flourished, not as relics, but as living traditions. What began as a scattering of exiles grew into a vibrant Gaelic world, woven into the fabric of a new country. The Scottish diaspora in Canada was no longer just a memory. It was a community, growing stronger with every new arrival. MacDonald arrived in Canada as a 5-year-old from Glasgow, carrying little more than his parents' hope for a future beyond the reach of eviction. Decades later, he would stand at the heart of a new nation. In 1867, MacDonald became the first Prime Minister of Canada, leading the country for 19 years. He oversaw the building of the Transcontinental Railway, binding provinces together with steel and vision, and earning the title Father of Confederation. Not far behind, other Scots laid the groundwork for Canada's institutions. James McGill, born in Glasgow in 1744, endowed the university that now bears his name. Chartered in 1821, McGill University became a beacon of learning in Montreal, attracting scholars from across the continent. In the west, Thomas Douglas, the Earl of Selkirk, founded the Red River Colony in 1812, an expanse 5 times the size of Scotland, carved from the prairies for displaced Highlanders. The fur trade empire of the Hudson's Bay Company ran on Scottish labour. 4 out of every 5 men in its ranks hailed from Orkney, braving winters in Rupert's Land and forging ties with indigenous communities. When the Canadian Pacific Railway Syndicate formed in 1885, Scottish-Canadian businessmen led the charge, driving tracks through forests and mountains. Canada's backbone was shaped by hands that once tilled highland soil, now building a country from coast to coast. Today, nearly 5 million Canadians, 1 out of every 7, trace their roots back to Scotland. In Nova Scotia, the connection runs even deeper. Almost a third of the province's people, 29.3%, claim Scottish ancestry. On Prince Edward Island, the number climbs to 41%, the highest concentration in the country. The legacy of the ship. Hector still echoes through families across the Maritimes. More than 140,000 Canadians can point to a Hector passenger in their family tree, each name a thread in a story of survival and new beginnings. The Gaelic language, once nearly erased in the Highlands, finds sanctuary in Cape Breton, where the Gaelic College keeps the old songs and stories alive. In 2009, Glen Breton whiskey began rolling out of Nova Scotia, its label written in Gaelic, a nod to a culture that refuses to fade. And in July 2025, a full-scale replica of the ship. Hector will set sail again from Pictou Harbour, a living monument to the journey that changed the face of a continent. These numbers and symbols are more than statistics. They are proof that out of exile, a new homeland took root and flourished. Today, 4.8 million Canadians trace their roots to Scotland, an unintended legacy of exile and ambition. As new generations shape Canada's future, echoes of that forced migration still define identity and belonging. Sometimes the most enduring nations are built from what others cast aside. What do you think?